welcome and hi everyone. Welcome and thanks for attending today for Financial Aid 101. My name is Carrie Harlow and I work with VSAC's Resource Center. Joining me today are Chris Berry, who will be helping us with tech support, and Stacy King, who will also be presenting. She is an education opportunity counselor with many years of experience helping adults as well as high school students in the Upper Valley region of our state. So we're very excited to have you here. This presentation has expanded a little bit. So if you're here and you've been to a Financial Aid 101 previously, just know that things might look a little bit different because we've had so many changes that are now normal and in our Financial Aid 101 as opposed to updates. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We would be happy to answer those, as was mentioned earlier, but I just want to make sure we all have that. And let's get started. I'd like to talk a little bit about our goals. We're going to talk about applications and programs largely today. We're going to focus on the FAFSA and Vermont grants, as well as VSAC administered scholarships, short-term training funding available for folks, as well as education loans, and where you can find more information. This presentation will be recorded, as you know, and we want you to know that for this program, you will be able to see previous slides, so please don't feel like you have to write things down. And we'll have the slide presentation as well as the recording, so there'll be a lot of information. With the slide presentation, we will have some links on there, so you will be able to, for instance, in the resources, link right to that particular resource that we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. Really, the applications for students who are applying for financial aid will probably be the FAFSA and Vermont Grant application. There's also institutional aid applications that might be required. For instance, there's one in particular called the CSS profile. That is required by some schools, and you can find the list at the CSS profile website. You'll notice that's a College Board address. Yes, they're the same folks who bring you the PSAT, SAT, and AP. They share the wealth, not only for students, but for parents. There's also VSAC Unified Scholarship application that we use for a lot of our programs. There may be other scholarship applications that students are filling out, as well as, when I say students, I mean students from age 17 all the way up to 80. So, and beyond, sorry. So these other scholarship applications might be things that people are also filling out. And additionally, for some students, they are also filling out loan applications. I'm doing this sort of in a chronological order. It's not necessarily hard and fast, but loan applications are generally the last thing that students and possibly their families are going to be reaching out for. So let's dive into the FAFSA. The FAFSA is required for all federal student aid programs. So the Pell Grant, federal student loans, college federal work study, in addition to SEOG grants if colleges have those available. It's also required for the Vermont Incentive Grant, the Part-Time Grant, and the 802 Opportunity Program. The FAFSA could be required for institutional financial aid, as well as for scholarships. And so what I will recommend to people oftentimes is just fill out the FAFSA. And we'll talk more in the updates about deeper reasons why. But really, even if a student just wants a student loan, they need to fill out that FAFSA. So how do you apply? There's the electronic version. You can go straight to FAFSA.gov or to studentaid.gov where it says FAFSA and complete the FAFSA. There's a paper form, but I need to tell you more than 99% of FAFSA filers are filing electronically, especially now because the FAFSA is simplified. It's really very, very easy to fill that out online. And right now, if you print out a paper application, I think it currently weighs in at 19 pages. So please, online is the best way to go. What we know is that this year, the FAFSA will open in December of 2024. They're telling us December 1st for the 2025-2026 school year. So that's the school year that opens in September of 2025. We currently have applications up. The FAFSA is up for the 2023-24, or sorry, 2024-25 school year, the school year we're in right now. So if people are working with students who are starting college in January, they're still filling out that form. We want you to know that that's available. That'll be available until probably the end of June. So who's eligible? I want you to know that on our resources page, we have information to link right to the studentaid.gov website that talks about who's eligible. So the big thing is someone has to demonstrate financial need for most of our programs. They have to be a US citizen or eligible non-citizen, and an eligible non-citizen is listed on the studentaid.gov website. You have to have a valid social security number, with the exception of students who are from certain territories, such as the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Palau. And they have to be enrolled or accepted for enrollment as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. There are some colleges and trade schools that are eligible for federal student aid that you might not expect. Sometimes career schools are eligible for federal student aid. Here in Vermont, the Advanced Welding Institute and Aveda Institutes are both eligible for federal student aid. Students have to be enrolled at least half-time to be eligible for the direct loan program. They have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, and that is defined by each college or career school. They have to sign a certification statement saying they're not in default on a student loan, do not owe money on a federal student grant that was possibly overpaid, and that they'll only use the federal student aid for education purposes, and also show that they're qualified to obtain a college or career school education.
Okay.
So yeah.
Sorry, I'll jump right in.
I'm going to hand off to Stacy to talk about whose information goes on the FAFSA.
So when we're trying to determine when a student's filling out a FAFSA, whose information should go on there, the first question we need to ask is, are they a dependent or an independent student? So there are certain questions that we ask of the student. Were you born before January 1st, 2002? Or another way to think of that is, will you be 24 before January 1st of the school year? Are you married? At the beginning of the year, will you be working on a master's or doctorate program, which happens after a bachelor's degree? Are you currently on active duty in the armed forces for purposes other than training, other than basic training, which is considered active duty? Are you a veteran of the armed forces? Do you now have children who will receive more than half of their support from you between July 1st of the school year and June 30th, the end of the school year? And then we have a whole other set of questions. I'll have you advance that, Carrie. Do you have dependents other than a children or spouse who live with you and who receive more than half of their support from you now and through June 30th of the school year? At any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? As determined by a court in your state of legal residence, are you or were you an emancipated minor, meaning you've divorced your parents? And does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your state of legal residence? So note that it says other than your parent or step-parent. This is not a custody question. This is, are you in a legal guardianship with somebody other than a parent or step-parent? So those are the questions sort of you run through. And then there's an unusual circumstance question, which is, are you an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And note that we highlighted unaccompanied because if a student is with their parents and homeless, they do not answer yes to this question. But if they are unaccompanied, then they would answer yes. And that can be determined through the high school that they attend, a district homeless liaison, the director of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program, the director of a runaway or homeless youth basic center or transitional living program, or a director or designee of a federal TRIO program, such as the TRIO programs that are held by VSAC, the Talent Search, Gear Up, or Educational Opportunity Center programs. Any of those agencies or institutions can determine homelessness and provide documentation for the student to say yes to being an unaccompanied youth who's homeless. And if all of those questions, as the student is running through those, if all of those are no, the student is considered dependent for federal student aid and they have to provide parent information. And note that the questions didn't ask if they lived with the parent. It didn't ask if the parents claim them on taxes. Those are not determining dependency for financial aid. This is a specific criteria just for financial aid. Students that are considered dependent, but their parents refuse to contribute information, now have the opportunity to answer a question on the FAFSA to say that, and to be only considered for unsubsidized federal student loans. They are not eligible for any grant aid because you have to provide parental income if you are dependent. They can, however, still borrow a federal student loan. And if those circumstances are all no's and the student is considered dependent, but there are other situations that are preventing parent contact or the ability to provide information, the student can work with the college financial aid administrator to ask for a dependency override. So they can fill out the FAFSA without their parent information. They get a provisional student aid index, so not a determined number, but a provisional. And then the student has to appeal and send documentation and work with their college financial aid administrator to evaluate whether they qualify for a dependency override. It's not something that anyone other than the college administrator themselves can authorize. And now I'm going to hand it back to Carrie.
Great. And just to reiterate that this information is on our resources page, so we're not expecting you to take notes or remember this verbatim. But we really get started with this process with this thing called an FSA ID. It's also called creating a FAFSA account. So you may hear those things interchangeably, but it's used for completing the FAFSA on the web. It's used for federal student loan entrance counseling and a student's master promissory note. It's used for Teach Grant agreement to serve documents. There's actually this thing called a Teach Grant where students may be eligible to get some financial aid, and if they teach after if they teach in their area after they graduate, they have that loan forgiven. It's a grant, but if they do not teach, they will have it become a loan. And also there's an annual student loan acknowledgement. Students do not have to fill that out, but they can access it and they can see how much borrowing they've done for the federal loan program. So students, parents, spouses, borrowers create a unique username and password. They also must link that unique username to an email address. So we recommend that students not use their school email address because a lot of high schools will close those accounts when students graduate. So we recommend that students, if they don't already have a free email account, they create one that they will use after high school graduation. They need the answers to 4 challenge questions, and they then have to set up this 2-step verification, and they can use email, a cell phone, or authentication app in order to do that. But they'll set that up while they're doing their FSA ID. So each FSA ID is unique to one person, and that's really important because for parents and students, they sometimes think they can share an FSA ID. They cannot. Spouses also cannot share an FSA ID. Your FSA ID or FAFSA account is unique to you. If a parent has an FSA ID from a previous child attending college or from their own higher education, that parent can use the same ID. And if they forgot it, use forgot username prompt, they cannot create a new one. Students, parents, and spouses can create an FSA ID now without a social security number. So students who are of mixed status, who may be married to or the child of someone without a social security number, can still apply for federal aid. The student and parent and spouse possibly must create an FSA ID and have the account confirmed before they begin the FAFSA. In the past, we could do a FAFSA and create an FSA ID as part of that process. They cannot do that anymore. We want people to give 3 to 5 days for that FSA ID or FAFSA account to process. It has to go through the Social Security Administration and through Homeland Security to make sure that the student's a citizen or eligible non-citizen, it needs some time. You might want to have some suggestions to additions for usernames, like they can add a middle name or initial, they can add a year, but they can't use their date of birth. They can use a house number. They can use the last digits of their phone number, not the last digits of their social security though. And there's even a YouTube video available that you can find about creating an FSA ID.
And Carrie, we had a request that you repeat who does not need to provide a social security number.
So the people who don't need to provide a social security number are U.S. citizens who belong to one of the U.S. territories, like Federation of Micronesia, the Republic of Palau. I'm missing one. So it will be on the slide that you can go back to. And it's also on the federal student aid website. So they're very clear about who's an eligible citizen as well as, or who's a citizen as well as an eligible non-citizen who might not have a social security number.
And to clarify, if a parent does not have a social security number, they can create an FSA ID. That a person who is not an eligible non-citizen and does not have a social security number cannot obtain federal financial aid, but it's okay if their parent or spouse does not have a social security number.
So Stacey, would you like to talk about better FAFSA changes or?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, I'll jump in here. So when the FAFSA update happened last year, the way the FAFSA is accessed shifted. So it's a roles-based process now. So each person who is needed to contribute information on the FAFSA enters it separately using their own FSA ID. So whoever is beginning the FAFSA then needs to invite the other contributors using their name, social security number, date of birth, and any email address. The email address does not have to be the same one that that person used to set up their FSA ID, but the rest of it does need to be the same. So legal name, correct social security number, and correct date of birth. This sometimes can be a challenge when students are inviting parents, and sometimes when parents are inviting students. So this is a place where communication is definitely going to be necessary to get it correctly. Often one of our problems we see is parents are not getting the invite to do their portion of the FAFSA, and that is usually because there's some error in the name, social, or date of birth. In the FAFSA, a contributor is the new name for anyone who needs to provide information on the FAFSA, but it does not mean contributing money, okay? It is not who is required to pay, just whose information is needed on the form. So it's contributor of information to determine federal, possibly institution, and possibly state aid. And each of the contributors have to consent now, and they must give consent and approval for their federal income tax return information to be accessed by the IRS and provided to FAFSA in order to do the calculations. If a parent, student, or spouse will not consent, the student is not eligible for federal financial aid. And some of you may remember the rather painful process of trying to remember the exact address of your tax return 2 years ago and not quite getting it to match up. You no longer have to do that. Now it's just a consent button. You approve. Okay. So who is a contributor? We started with first you have to ask, are you dependent or independent? Once you've clarified that, then who else has to contribute? So for dependent students, the question is which parent or contributor information is required. So if their biological or adoptive parents live together, both parents' information is used regardless of whether they're married or not. If they don't live together, then the parent who provided more support to the student in the past year is required to complete the FAFSA as a contributor. If they are 50-50, which we often get families saying, well, we have it split equally. Then the questions you might want to ask are who carries the student on their health insurance, who supplies the student with a car or car insurance. It's basically who is providing more support to that student. And if the parent who is providing more support to that student is married, even if it's a recent marriage, then the parent and the step parent both provide information as contributors. And if neither parent provided more support and it's truly 50-50 and you can document like every penny is split, well, I guess every 2 pennies are split, then it's the parent who has more income and assets who are supposed to report on the FAFSA as a contributor. If you're independent, then it's a little shorter list. If you're married, it's the student and their spouse, even if the marriage is recent. And if they are single, separated, or divorced and not remarried, it is just that independent student who provides information.
So let's talk about determining financial need. You may have heard of something called an EFC. Well, the EFC is no longer with us. What is in its place is an SAI, or a student aid index. It's determined slightly differently than that EFC. But we want to be clear, the student aid index is a starting point for a college, for a state grant program, for scholarship programs to determine financial aid eligibility. It does not indicate what the student or family has to pay. Part of that expected family contribution, the reason why it's been retired, is because people heard EFC and thought, that is what I'm required to pay. Well, what we found is that that is not often what families are required to pay. Sometimes the family ends up having to pay more than their EFC. So right now, the way that that's determined is income, and they compare that to federal poverty guidelines. And if a student meets those income criteria, they might be eligible for a maximum Pell Grant or a minimum Pell Grant, which is really great. But they also have a calculation if they're not eligible for either thing, or they're eligible only for the minimum. They want to go through and see if the student's eligible for more than the minimum Pell Grant. And so they're going to look at things like assets that the parent has, the age of the older parent, or if an independent student, the age of the student. There's actually a federal student aid estimator website, and that's really great. We have the link there. Families can use it. They can figure out what sorts of federal aid they might be eligible for. The income that's coming over on the FAFSA is coming from a prior year income. That is federal student aid's fancy way of calling it the taxes that were filed before the student school year that they're applying for. So if a student's attending college now, they are submitting the FAFSA now until June 30th of 2025. They're using tax information from 2022. If a student is looking to go next September, they're going to be applying between December 1st and June 30th of 2026. They're using tax return income from 2023. And like Stacy mentioned, this is automatic. It happens seamlessly. I'm going to tell you a reason why you need this information in just a minute. And then if a junior, parent of a junior, is asking about this, they would be using tax info from this year, from 2024. That way people don't have to estimate and then verify taxes later on. They can use a tax return that's already been filed. And I mention this because we're going to talk about frequent errors. And one of the frequent errors would be a reason why you need to have this information. And so people may want to bring a copy of their tax return with them to file their FAFSA. Let's talk about those frequent errors. Stacy mentioned the parent and student social security numbers, the parent and student date of birth. Those are super important in this process. If one number is misentered, we're not saying anyone doesn't know their social security number or date of birth, but if one number is misentered, what happens is this whole process grinds to a halt. And we've got to go back and figure that out. Another frequent error is people filing the wrong year application. We will have in December 2 years worth of applications available. We want to make sure that students who are beginning school in the 24-25 school year are filling out the right FAFSA, and students who want aid for the 25-26 school year are filling out the right FAFSA. Students will apply each year for financial aid. Maybe a frequent error is divorced, remarried, unmarried, but living together parent information. We know that's confusing. There is often some confusion with legal guardianship and custody. That is very different. A legal guardianship is a legal document that says this person who's not the student's parent is now their guardian. Sometimes income earned by parents and step parents is misreported. Another big mistake people have, and why we want families to have their tax returns available, is if there's an IRA or pension rollover, The FAFSA cannot read the rollover on the taxes, and they ask a question about the rollover. Wow, a lot of people miss that, and it looks like suddenly there's all this non-taxable income that the parent got in that tax year. So we need that rollover information reported correctly. Household size is sometimes an issue because there may be a baby expected. You can't count them until the child is born. Real estate and investment net worth. We have people including assets not supposed to be listed on an asset, like their home. We have people and their retirement. Oh my gosh, when people report their retirement, that's not to be reported on the FAFSA. And sometimes we have people who report the value of a property rather than the net worth, which is the value minus the debt. So those are really common errors. The other common error we saw last year was answering the question about not wanting aid other than an unsubsidized loan. And my understanding is federal student aid is still working to figure out a different way to ask that question. Also, not submitting the FAFSA after signing. Because this is roles-based, the student has to be the one to submit the FAFSA. And so if a student has filled out their part and then the parent filled out their part and they both sign, the student might have to go back in, depending on when things happen, to make sure it's submitted. There are FAFSA acknowledgements. So the FAFSA submission summary can be seen right after the FAFSA processes. Students can watch for confirmation emails, and parents can watch for confirmation emails from the U.S. Department of Education. They can add do not reply at studentaid.gov to their email program so that they know that that's not junk. Mail is only used if an email address was not listed on a paper application. All of the other online applications require an email address, so it will most likely be emailed if you're one of that more than 99%. One confirmation for submitting the FAFSA. So a student will get a confirmation about that, and there will also be a confirmation to the student that the FAFSA was processed. And the student can also check on FAFSA.gov and sign in anytime to check their current FAFSA status. Verification is a process by which the U.S. Department of Education confirms that information received that was provided by students and parents that the FAFSA is accurate. Now, because of this automatic transfer, this consent and automatic transfer of taxes has happened, students can be selected for verification by the Department of Education or the college, but there are much fewer requests for verification because we're getting that tax information. The items to be verified may vary. It could be the student's identity, it could be their statement of purpose, it could be information about household size. But federal aid will not be dispersed until verification is complete. A college or trade school or university can certainly award a student financial aid, but it will not be paid until verification is complete if the student's been chosen. Let's talk a little bit about available federal student aid. These are the maximum amounts for programs for the 24-25 school year. So I want to be clear about that. The federal Pell Grant is $7,395 for the maximum. I am always stymied by this because a lot of times they are separating that out by 2 semesters. Usually the first semester gets the extra $1, but it's also prorated at less than full time. There's federal work study, which depends on the funds available from the school. There's also the direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. There's a maximum for dependent students of $5,500, which might go pretty far at Community College of Vermont, but it's not going to go very far at an $80,000 a year school. The maximum for that dependent student in subsidized loan will be $3,500. Subsidized loans means the government's paying the interest while the student's in school, and it's based on financial need. There's a maximum of $9,500 available for independent students in the first year, and the maximum for that is $3,500 subsidized. And then there are direct plus loans for parents. That covers the cost of attendance minus other financial aid received. It has nothing to do with whether or not the parents have the ability to pay on that plus loan. It is only the cost of attendance at the school minus other aid offered. There's other funds from other programs available. We have links to federal grant programs as well as federal student loan programs for more details. Any questions?
We've only had one come through the chat, which was, could a parent create their FSA ID now, even though they can't start the FAFSA until December? Absolutely. A junior parent could create their FSA ID now. Anyone can create their FSA ID at any time. And it's great to have it ahead of time. Just keep track of it. And I don't see anything else coming through the chat. Does anyone else have a question they want to surface?
Chris, would you like to do some of our questions that we have for our participants to see if they got all that fire hose of information?
Let's do it. You just launched a poll. Should be popping up on your screen. Feel free to read through and answer those questions, and then we'll see what folks are saying.
And there are 2 questions there, just to tell you. People nervous about answering questions. It's okay. No one's going to get shamed here.
No, they're trickling in. We're up to 21%, 24% folks, 27%. It looks like folks are paying attention.
They are.
We are. And it's really interesting because it is sometimes very confusing for folks, especially with McKinney-Vento, to kind of differentiate between whether students are eligible for McKinney-Vento and whether students are eligible to be independent on the FAFSA. And you guys have it. You're right into it. Thank you.
Great
You can
job.
go ahead and end that poll. Thank you. All right. Stacy, would you like to move into the Vermont Grant?
Absolutely. So, in addition to the federal aid that we just talked about, there's also state aid through Vermont. And this, we see sometimes people leaving some funds on the table that they would have been eligible for. So there are multiple kinds of grants that are offered by the state of Vermont. The Vermont Grant, and when people refer to that, they're typically referring to the Vermont Degree Grant. And that can be for full-time students, including early college students, which is unusual, as well as part-time students. You don't have to be taking a full load in order to apply for a Vermont grant. The early college stipend, I believe we talk about a little bit later, Carrie.
We do.
Okay. There's 802 Opportunity, which is a new program that has come up in the last few years, where the Vermont legislature has supported students attending Community College of Vermont, and as well as an advancement grant, which is for students that are pursuing things that may not be a degree program, or they are not Title IV eligible. And then there are also micro grants, which are pools of emergency money, small amounts to help a student who may drop out or be unable to complete their program due to a small expense. All right, so let's talk about how to get it. Who is eligible? You do need to be a Vermont resident. And in Vermont, residency is defined as having been in the state for more than 1 year, so more than 12 months. You have to be an eligible citizen or not a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, as defined by the question on the Vermont Grant. It gives very clear information about refugee, asylee, and other statuses that are eligible. You need to be enrolled in or enrolling in an undergraduate program leading to a degree, diploma, or certificate. This is for the degree grant, not necessarily for the advancement grant. You have to have financial need as determined for the VSAC grant program, and much of that is from FAFSA information. You have to maintain satisfactory academic progress and be attending an eligible institution that is allowed to have state funding. You also can not have received more than the equivalent of 10 full-time semesters of the Vermont grants unless you are in the Doctor of Medicine program at UVM or any Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program anywhere, and a Vermont resident. You also have to not have received your bachelor's degree for the Vermont degree grant. Once you have received a bachelor's degree, you are no longer eligible for this funding, except if you are in the Doctor of Medicine program at UVM or any Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program. And you also have to not owe a refund to any federal or state grant or scholarship program. This is not the same as owing back student loans. This is specifically you had grant money that was overpaid or returned and that you have to compensate for it. And then I'm going to pass it over to Carrie to talk about how to actually apply for the Vermont Grant.
Great. So it all begins with MyVSAC. And if you were looking at the VSAC webpage, there is a teal button in the upper left, just off center left. And it says MyVSAC, and you click there. The account is for the student. The parent may not need to make an account, but the account for MyVSAC is for the student. And the students use the same MyVSAC account when they're applying for Vermont grants and for VSAC-Assisted Scholarship. For each year of enrollment, they can also use it if they need to apply for a VSAC private loan. Contact information must be updated. We need correct email and postal addresses for efficient communication with the student. It's a two-step process. The student creates an account with an email address. They also do two-factor verification, and a link is emailed to the student to confirm their email address and create the password. So they might be moving back and forth between their phone and computer in order to do that. Students, and one of the things with two-factor authentication, they can either use a cell phone number or they can set it up with an Okta authentication app. Students who lose or forget their MyVSAC login should follow prompts to be reminded. Please do not create a new account. That will not work the same way with the FSA ID. So let's talk about the Vermont Grant application. It has to be filed and all the requested documentation has to be submitted by the student to be eligible. Colleges may estimate a Vermont grant on their financial aid notifications, but it's really VSAC who determines this grant. There is no additional application for 802 opportunity. We're going to say that multiple times because people sometimes still call us and ask. So there is no additional application for 802 opportunity. And the degree grant application will be available October 1st for the 25-26 school year. So that will be opening October 1st. And students can apply, as I mentioned, by clicking on that MyVSAC button and creating their MyVSAC account, or they can just use it to log in. There is a Vermont Grant link from the FAFSA on the confirmation page. It says what happens next and track the status of your form. And right beneath it, it says, start your application for Vermont state-based aid. This will bring the person filing the FAFSA right to our MyVSAC login page. So they don't have to do the extra clicks, they just get right there. And this is what it looks like. This is the MyVSAC login. So if a student already has an account, they would log into MyVSAC. And if the student does not have an account, they can register now. Unlike the FSA ID, the FAFSA login can be created on the day of the filing of the Vermont Grant application. So that's a little bit different in that aspect.
Just to clarify, Carrie, the MyVSAC account can be created on the day of.
Yes, not the FSA ID. Sorry if I goofed that up. It is the MyVSAC account. So that is, thank you. Once they get in, they'll get a landing page that tells them, that gives them the option of where they're going to go next. And so, of course, to apply for the Vermont Grant, they're going to click on the grants section, and then there will be an apply for a Vermont Grant. There actually will be a question before we get here that says, will you be starting school before July 1st, 2025? And by answering that, that will take you to the right year's application. But you may see both the Vermont Grant and the Advancement Grant application. So you want to pick the Vermont Grant. So let's talk about the Vermont degree grants. Much of the income and asset information is coming from the FAFSA. Students who designate their state of residence as Vermont will have that information come to VSAC automatically once the FAFSA processes. So the income is going to be the same as the FAFSA. For the 25-26 school year, it'll be using 2023 income. Asset information comes from the FAFSA, but families also need to report information not collected on the FAFSA, which is the family's primary home value and debt. And so if a student's a dependent student, that would be parents reporting it. If they don't own a home, if they rent, they're just going to put in zeros. They don't leave it blank. And if it's an independent student, it would be their home if they own it, value, and debt. Would you like to talk about 802 opportunity, Stacy?
Sure. So we've referenced this a few times now. The 802 Opportunity Grant is for Vermont residents that are attending Community College of Vermont, any location of Community College of Vermont. It's funded by the Vermont legislature and VSAC administers it. So that's where the MyVSAC component comes in. The income guidelines are for dependent students, parent income needs to be lower than $75,000 as reported on the FAFSA, or for independent students, the student and spouse, if applicable, income has to be lower than $75,000 as reported on the FAFSA. And the eligibility criteria are the same as the Vermont grant that we went over earlier about being a Vermont resident, etc. And between a Pell, Vermont Grant, and 802 Opportunity, any students who fall into that income range, their tuition is fully covered, as well as the $100 administration fee. So students do have to complete the FAFSA first to see if they're Pell eligible, then complete the Vermont Grant. And if they are partially Vermont Grant eligible or not Vermont Grant eligible, but are under that income, they are then awarded 802 Opportunity with no additional application needed. And we mentioned early college as well. Students who do not have a high school credential are not eligible for federal student aid while they're still in high school. So those early college students have not yet graduated. But Vermont has created a state funding process so that the students who have financial need as compared to their cost of attendance can potentially be awarded up to $500 a semester of Vermont Grant in order to offset some of the other costs like books, transportation, and such. That Vermont Grant money for the early college students is paid directly to the college each semester. And then after the student tuition fees and other bills have been paid, well, the tuition is already paid, but that's a different conversation. If there's any left over, then it's refunded to the student to help with their other expenses. So these early college students are doing the same thing to apply for this aid as any other student. They are completing a FAFSA and listing at least one college, which is whichever college they're attending, and then the Vermont Grant application. And on that, there is a specific question saying, are you enrolling in early college for this academic year you're requesting financial aid for? And that will help them process this for a student, even though they don't have a high school credential yet. All right, notifications. Is this you, Carrie?
Yeah, well, it is, but also we have a question in the chat that I'd love to surface. And so the question is the eligibility for a Vermont degree grant. It says that the program needs to lead to a degree, diploma, or certificate. What is meant by a diploma or certificate?
Those are typically programs that do not necessarily award college credit for the diploma version, or a certificate program has the number of credits earned is lower than there would be for a degree awarding. So for example, you could do a certificate in bookkeeping and take, typically it's fewer classes, about 9 classes. And a diploma, I don't have a good example of a diploma awarding school. Do you have one, Carrie?
I think it's just a matter of semantics, right? Does the school call it a diploma when they're done?
Versus a certificate, yes.
Right, right.
So these are programs that are eligible for federal funding, but do not award a college degree.
Correct. So again, when we talk about the Aveda Institute in Williston, Vermont, or we talk about advanced welding in South Burlington, Vermont, those are both programs that lead to certificates. They are eligible for federal student aid. They are eligible for the Vermont degree grant. All right. So notifications for the Vermont grant. If more information is needed, requests for information are electronic. They are emailed to the student. And a student might say, oh, I got something from VSAC, but I don't know what it means. It's probably a request for information. A paper letter will be mailed if the student doesn't log in within 20 days of the initial request. And many forms can be completed online. So like tax returns could be uploaded if someone asked for that. It could be a parent asset worksheet that can be completed online. A student verification of financial support from a parent that could be uploaded online. So those are all available that way. I want to talk for a minute about special or unusual circumstances. We did refer to this during the FAFSA, but we also have this for the Vermont Grant. And so we wanted to put this here. Unusual circumstances might be a change of employment status. Remember, for the 25-26 school year, we're using 2023 tax information. We're in 2024 and things could change drastically. Medical or dental bills not covered by insurance could be something that's impacted a family, or high insurance costs and deductibles that they're paying. A lot of times this is actual amounts paid as opposed to I have a bill. A change in the parent or student marital status is something that's worth getting in touch with the college about. Unusual dependent care expenses, natural disasters. We've had Vermonters, unfortunately, deal with that last year and this year. Expenses that were not reimbursed by insurance or FEMA could be a special circumstance. And also the student being unable to obtain parental information, maybe due to the parent being incarcerated, or that they escaped an abusive situation, or they have parents who are not even in this country and they have no relationship with them. They're not communicating with them. They may not be able to qualify under the other self-supporting questions, but really it's not just that the parents are refusing to give their information. This is a really extreme situation. And so what people can do is they can send a letter or an email to each college financial aid office to the Vermont Grant Program at VSAC and say to them, these are our unusual circumstances. Anytime people can use dollar amounts, that's really helpful. So I lost my job, I'm on unemployment, and I'm now bringing in only 2/3 of my income from 2023. That is really helpful in determining where to go from here, if it's going to make a difference. So we really encourage people to do this because a FAFSA is a just the facts document. The Vermont Grant application is a just the facts document. We don't know the whole story. So we want people to communicate that. And financial aid people, I should say, are in this because they want to help students. So they are here to help you, but they can't, a lot of times they don't know to reach out to you that there's a different circumstance. We want families to take care of that. Any questions about Vermont grants before we move on to VSAC-assisted scholarships? Okay.
Great. So I'll jump in here. The VSAC-Assisted Scholarships, very exciting news that it will be available online next week for students that are going to be attending college next academic year, 25-26. And you'll have the booklets in schools and other public institutions in early October and can be ordered for early October. So the VSAC-Assisted Scholarships, we can skip to the next page. We administer hundreds of scholarships for different entities around the state, and the students can apply for these many different scholarships in one application. They access it through their MyVSAC portal, just like they did for the Vermont Grant, and they're going to choose work with VSAC-assisted scholarships. The best practices for this scholarship process is to not just meet the deadline, but beat the deadline, and to check if everything has been received. So in the application, there may be a request for an essay or a letter of recommendation or a portfolio, for example, for an art scholarship. And the way scholarships work is typically students are not notified that they have applied or notified if something is missing. This is a competitive process, and so they need to follow up and be on top of is everything in there? We typically won't see something posted to MyVSAC until 24 hours after it's been received. It is the student's responsibility to keep track of the scholarships that they've applied for and what's required for the complete application. Definitely encourage your students, if you're working with them, to allow time for transcripts and recommendation letters to be done well and sent in, not at the last minute. We have had some students be very disappointed because their letter of recommendation was not received by the deadline, and they had done the rest of the work, but it was an incomplete application. If a student knows that if a school knows that the student will be applying for the VSAC-assisted scholarships, but has not yet, they won't have the ability to upload documents such as the transcript, but they can mail them in. As long as any document is postmarked by the deadline, it is accepted, even if it arrives, if it takes 4 or 5 or many days to reach us, as long as it's postmarked, it will be accepted. All right.
Can I add one thing here, Stacy?
Sure.
On the MyVSAC scholarships page, there is an option to look at required documents. And so students can actually log into MyVSAC, go to scholarships, look at the required documents, and they can see what's missing in real time. So that is helpful. Again, you want to give a day if something just uploaded, they're not going to be able to see it right away. But that is a way that students can keep track of this. So while we're saying it's a student's responsibility to keep track, we're giving them the best information we have, and they can find it out.
Great.
So let's talk about best. Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
On the documents that are being uploaded or mailed in, it's really important to label them the way that the booklet asks them to be labeled. It typically does have an identifier such as the student's name and date of birth so that we know which application it belongs with, as well as possible other labels. And for example, in the essay, we want to make sure students are really following instructions. So if there is a minimum word length, they really do mean like it needs to be at least that long. There are specific criteria asked about in the essay, and it's very clearly posted of like, what are we looking for? And we want the students to answer those questions. A recommendation has to be on letterhead of the organization or signed, and ideally both. But a plain recommendation with no letterhead and no signature would not be considered as a complete one. Draft review. If any people joining us right now are English teachers, then you know this process. There are a lot of common errors in spelling and punctuation in essays. Definitely review that, have somebody read it. Often they will catch something that you are not seeing yourself. And we want to remind students that these are competitive. Scholarships are typically competitive, meaning you may be eligible, you may meet the criteria, but you are competing against others who also are eligible and meet the criteria, and you want to do your best application possible. There's also workforce development funding, and we put it here because it's applied for through the VSAC scholarship portal. So going into MyVSAC, choosing VSAC-assisted scholarships. So these are state funding initiatives that were meant to address Vermont's workforce shortages. So they are 0% interest loans, 10-year loans that begin repayment 1 year after completing the credential, but they can be forgiven by working in Vermont in that area in an eligible position for 1 year. So again, you go to MyVSAC, go to the VSAC-assisted scholarships, and then there are options for Vermont trades, and that could include things like Advanced Welding Institute that we talked about earlier, as well as non-college funding, non-college programs. There's Vermont teacher, Vermont nursing, Vermont nurse faculty, mental health professional, psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, dentist, dental hygienist, and a National Guard tuition benefit program. The ones with the asterisks have already been exhausted for this academic year, 24-25. Those without have not. So if there are students that would qualify for these, they can still apply. These can be an excellent way for many students to cover up to the cost of their tuition. And then if they are also grant eligible, such as Pell Grant, Vermont Grant, etc., that can cover some things like room and board, books, etc. So we wanted to make sure we mentioned this, even though it's not necessarily traditional scholarship funding.
Any questions about scholarships? All right, let's talk a little bit about education loans. And so we're going to start with the federal direct loans. As we mentioned, those require the FAFSA, and the college determines eligibility. So how much subsidized and unsubsidized, that's something that the college determines. For students, there's two types. As we mentioned, the subsidized loan, the interest is paid by the government while the student's in school and during a 6-month grace period after graduation. The unsubsidized loan, the student is responsible for the interest while they're in school. Only undergraduates are eligible for the subsidized loan. It is based on the student financial need, which is why it is the college who determines that, because they determine the financial need. And the maximums are based on the student's year in college. There's entrance counseling that the student has to do before their first loan is dispersed, as well as a master promissory note. Most of those are completed online. With the exception of the master promissory note, there are some schools that would prefer a paper version, or a borrower could request a paper version to be sent. And the post-secondary institution will instruct the student on how they will complete it. They may see it as a task from their financial aid office that needs to be completed. It does not need to be completed until the student has chosen that school. So we do not want students applying for federal direct loans for all the schools they were accepted to, only to the school that the student is deciding to enroll in. I mentioned that there is eligibility based on the student's year in school. So second year, unlike the first year at $5,500, the second year is $6,500 for a dependent student, then $7,500 for the junior and senior year. For independent students, their eligibility is higher, so it's $9,500 the first year, then $10,500 the second, and the third and fourth year, $12,500. That is based on a student's number of credits earned. So it's not necessarily the year in college. Like, I've been in 4 years, but I've been part-time. It's by the credits earned. So they might be a sophomore or junior if they were part-time. There's also this thing called the Federal Direct Plus loan. And Plus was short for Parent Loans for Undergraduate Students. So calling it a plus loan seems like we're adding an extra term. It's like calling an ATM machine. But it's available for parents and dependent undergrad students, as well as graduate or professional students, to help pay for college or career schools that are eligible for federal student aid. It's commonly, as I mentioned, called the Plus for parents, but it's the Grad Plus for graduate students. The maximum plus loan is the cost of attendance at the college or trade school minus the aid offered. There is a credit check and an endorser alternative for that. Some college will list the Parent Plus eligibility on financial aid notifications. And what students see is, I'm all set. I have all the aid I need. But all of a sudden, there's this $13,000 or $20,000 Parent Plus loan on this financial aid notification. Students don't realize that's a loan that their parents have to borrow, and they may or may not choose to borrow that loan. They may or may not be able to pay for that loan. And when thinking about a Parent Plus loan, it's important for families to think about, how long is the student going to be in school? Is this a 2-year process? Is this a 4-year process? And those plus loans are in the parents' names. So even if a student agrees to pay those plus loans after they graduate, it's the parents who are getting billed. It is the parents whose credit will take a hit if the student misses a payment. So every year there's a different interest rate for these loans. Once a loan is dispersed for a student, that is a fixed interest rate forever for that loan. So this year's direct loan, the interest rate for an undergraduate student is 6.53%. The origination fee is 1.057%. What that means, the origination fee usually covers the cost of servicing that loan and getting the loan to the school. And so what that means is that the amount the student borrows is not what's going to get paid to the school. So actually for that $5,500 loan, the student might see $5,442 paid. For a Parent Plus loan of $5,000, you can see they have a higher origination fee and a higher interest rate. A plus loan of $5,000 might show $4,789 coming through, split up by 2 semesters, if the college is a semester process. And so sometimes students, when they have planned this to the dollar, or parents, when they have planned this to the dollar, have not taken into consideration those origination fees, and they may contact you and say, wait, why do I still owe this much money? That could be why. There's also non-federal loans available, and they're for eligible students who need education financing beyond the federal student loan. We always say, get those federal loans first. They have, for students, they have protections, they have, deferments available. There's public service loan forgiveness. There's all sorts of things for these federal loans. Take those out for students. And then if you need a private loan for the rest, they can choose a private loan lender. We have a great brochure called My Education Loans. People can order that on our publication pages. And it's really great information that VSAC put together with college financial aid offices, with parents and with students. It's not a VSAC get our loan vehicle. It is much more of a here's what you need to know when you're borrowing education loans. And so we recommend that you visit our site to also look at loan calculators, maybe compare total costs. We have a student loan and parent loan. So there's a lot of resources out there, but we want people to be able to choose the program, the loan that works best for them. When people are comparing non-federal loans, they want to think about things like interest rates, whether it's fixed or variable. What fees are involved? For instance, VSAC, I'm familiar with VSAC loans because I work for VSAC. We are a fee-free loan, but other lenders, it might not be. What are the repayment options? And are there other benefits? Like, is there an interest rate reduction if you do auto pay? Is there a cosigner release? So most high school students are not eligible to borrow a non-federal loan without a cosigner. They just don't have enough of a credit history. That cosigner can get a release from some loans after a certain number of payments. So it's really important to find that out and see how that can be done and make sure that the student meets those criteria. Any questions about loans? Again, we'll have a lot of resources on our website in that Ed Pro page where people can learn more about them, as well as links to some of the programs to help federal loan borrowers.
And I just want to reiterate that many students will say, oh, I will borrow a loan for the rest, not understanding that $5,500 is the limit of what they can borrow as dependent students that first year. And then the rest will likely require a cosigner to get a private loan or a plus loan. And it would be great for everyone to understand that as well and help their students understand.
Right. And at VSAC, we call them co-borrowers because in reality, a cosigner is a co-borrower. They are on that loan. Their credit is impacted. So it's very important to remember that if there's a cosigner, that they are responsible if the student does not end up paying. Stacy, would you like to take on short-term training?
Sure. We also have a lot of funding available for students that are not necessarily pursuing a degree or certificate. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of those various options. One that we wanted to mention is a dual enrollment stipend. So if you have students that are pursuing college level classes during high school and doing that dual enrollment process, there may be additional expenses like travel or to the class or books for the class. Those students, if they are eligible for free and reduced lunch, then a student can get a dual enrollment stipend to help offset those costs. When they apply for their dual enrollment voucher through their process at their school, they indicate that they have additional expenses for the class and that they are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The coordinator at the high school fills out the school information and they verify those expenses and the eligibility for free and reduced lunch. Once that happens, the Agency of Education will send a list to VSAC of those students, and VSAC mails those students a check for $150, right, directly to them. It's interesting because some students are surprised and don't know what to do with a paper check. So can help them with that process. But that is to the address that is on that dual enrollment voucher application.
And it's important to note that free or reduced lunch eligibility is due to the family applying and showing financial eligibility for that program. It is not automatic if the school does free meals for everyone.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Carrie. So then let's talk about the post-high school credential sources of aid. There's a lot of information on our adult learners site at our vsac.org/plan adult learners/financial aid. Please feel free to go and explore this in more detail because this will be a lot of information. So we have some of these options have an asterisk, and these could be available for students that are pursuing degree or certificate work as well. So there could be employer contributions. Sometimes employers will do tuition reimbursement or tuition support for their people who work for them. The VA may have funding that students who are military connected may be able to access. Higher Ability Vermont is an amazing agency in the state of Vermont, formerly called Vocational Rehabilitation. They do outstanding work in supporting any Vermonters who identify as having a physical, mental, emotional, or learning disability access training that's needed for employment, and that can include degree, certificate work, or non-degree work. There are scholarships, and I noticed earlier that we had a member of the Curtis Foundation joining us today and want to say hello and thank you. One of the scholarships that I am lucky enough to help administer is the Curtis Credential of Value Scholarship, and that is for students that are pursuing education that is not degree work. And we are able to nominate students for that to help support their education to get a credential of value. Then we have some that don't have asterisks, and these are specific to students that are not pursuing degree work. So the Department of Labor has a lot of educational support programs, and one includes the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This may or may not be eligible to be used for a certificate, but is unlikely to be used for a degree. There are lots of different supports that Department of Labor can provide, including supplies, books, and other items like that, as well as potential tuition support. It all depends upon the individual student. They would work with the Department of Labor directly to see what could be provided. In terms of VSAC and the state of Vermont, we have that advancement grant that we referred to earlier, and we'll get some details on advancement in an upcoming slide. There are also registered apprenticeships where students can earn while they learn, becoming, for example, plumbing, electrician, ski lift operator apprenticeships. There's a lot of different options where you are both working and earning a wage and doing educational processes. There are program or provider funds, and what we mean by that is that, for example, if it is a program that provides commercial driver's license training, they themselves may have scholarships or grants or other funding that a student can apply for. And then there's the Vermont Trades Forgivable Loan Scholarship, which we referred to earlier in the scholarship section. This is a program that is a 0% interest forgivable loan in the value of tuition up to a limit that is set each year. Is right now $23,000, I believe. And this, again, is a 0% interest loan paid back over 10 years, starting 1 year after completing the credential. unless the student works in Vermont under that trade in an eligible job for the equivalent of 1 year, in which case the entire loan is forgiven as a scholarship. It's very cool. Sorry, I like that one. All right, so let's talk about a little bit more detail on the advancement grant. So it is currently available right now for any programs that start before June 30th, 2025 in this 24-25 academic year. The new form for programs that start in the 25-26 academic year will typically come out in early May. It is meant for non-degree coursework or short-term training programs, such as a commercial driver's license, or up to 2 college classes that prepare students for further coursework or sort of like try out that if that's going to be the right option for them. There's a $7,500 limit for the current academic year, and there's a subset that driver's education can be funded by an advancement grant for those that have a high school credential, and but that limit is $1,000. You can't get more than 2 terms of any kind of state grant within an academic year. So if you did 1 semester of Vermont grant and 1 semester advancement grant, that is great. But then if you had summer courses, for example, you would have exhausted your 2 grants for the year. Individuals can be awarded up to 6 advancement grants in their lifetime. And again, to be eligible, the student has to be out of high school. It works the same way in terms of using prior tax year and income information from that prior tax year. And in order to have it processed, the application will ask that those be uploaded to MyVSAC or mailed in to determine that income eligibility. And it works the same way as if you were going for a traditional degree grant. You log into MyVSAC. If you have not created an account, you register. Then you're going to log in. And we're going to go to the Work with Grants section. And then within the Work with Grants section, you would want to be sure you're choosing the right year, saying whether or not your program starts before July, and then choosing the advancement grant application. This is a common error where people apply for the incorrect one. If that happens, the student will see a error message that they are ineligible for that grant, and then they hopefully can correct it, but they will need to be paying attention to their MyVSAC to see that. And this is what it would look like after they've applied and been awarded. You can see an example here. This is an old example because Vermont Technical College does not exist anymore, but that's okay. It might say now Vermont State University Continuing Education and Workforce Development, just a nice shift in length. So for example, this is an LNA or licensed nursing assistant credential, and then you can see their enrollment status and then the amount that was awarded. And these also are directly dispersed to the institution. So it does not go to the student, it goes to the college or institution or provider. All right, questions about advancement grant or short-term training credentials? All right, so I see one in the chat from Mary Lynn that do adults enrolled in a high school completion program, do they have to receive 3 squares to be eligible for the dual enrollment stipend? I love this question and I do not know the answer. I would suspect yes, but we would have to follow up on that one and get back to you, Mary Lynn.
All right, let's talk about information resources. Folks, we are almost done. We're in the home stretch. But I don't want to leave you today without having information about where you can find more. If you are hungry for more information, the Financial Aid Toolkit is great for federal student aid. They have news and updates. Right now, they have some information about a prototype for the 2025-2026 FAFSA that people can use and see a little bit what the questions look like right now. There's college planning and federal financial aid resources. There's links to webinars or infographics, different tools and resources for social media. So they have all sorts of information. You can search by tools and resources, or you can, learn more or get training. At VSAC, we have this EdPro news that you can sign up for. We have a website where there's news and updates. You can sign up for the EdPro News newsletter if you choose to, and that gives you information about things we have coming up. Some of you might have registered for this workshop because you get that newsletter. And then also we have that financial aid resources for education professionals page. And that will be where the video from this workshop lives, where the slides live, and where all those links to all that helpful information is that I had referred to before. Now, you may notice we didn't talk a whole lot about the new FAFSA other than a few things. October 30th, we have a training, and it is all updates. It is federal aid, it is FAFSA information, it is state updates, and VSAC updates. So we have a lot going on, but that is going to be available on Wednesday, October 30th from 9 to 11. If you go to vsac.org/events, you will find that information there, and you can sign up there. And finally, we have our contact information. So if more questions come up, we are happy to answer them. Our email addresses are there, as well as phone numbers where you can call us. And what I can tell you is, if you get our voicemail, leave us a message, let us know how to reach you, and we will get back to you. Any final questions? That was a lot. You have gone through a lot. This was training by fire hose, and you all survived. Give yourself a hand. You definitely deserve a treat today.
It's like learning a new language in an hour and a half.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and maybe we'll see you again for October 30th. We would love to tell you more about all the updates.